Hello, my name is Ryu, and this is my review. At Microsoft's E3 2017 conference, Moon Studios announced Ori and the Will of the Wisps, the sequel to Ori and the Blind Forest. I played the original Ori and the Blind Forest in summer of 2015, and it was fantastic. To this day, it may actually be one of my favorite games of all time. In April of 2017, Ori and the Blind Forest Definitive Edition was released on Steam, and was heavily discounted for everyone who bought the original game. When I watched the Ori and the Will of the Wisps announcement trailer, I got extremely excited and decided that not only was I finally going to play the original's Definitive Edition, I was going to make a video about it as well. I am certain I will make a video for Wisps when it releases. Ori and the Blind Forest is a 2D Metroidvania-style platformer with challenging, fast-paced, stylish gameplay, incredible visuals, and a fantastic soundtrack. You play as Ori, a forest spirit that looks a bit like a Carbuncle from Final Fantasy XIV. Ori and the Blind Forest has a simple story and explores three key themes: nature, balance, and love. Ori was developed by Moon Studios and published by Microsoft Studios. It was released on March 11, 2015 for PC and Xbox One. The Definitive Edition was released on March 11, 2016 for Xbox One and on April 27, 2016 for PC. This review is on the PC version, purchased on Steam. The game can be played with mouse and keyboard or a controller. I played with mouse and keyboard. The original Ori and the Blind Forest is a fantastic experience, and the Definitive Edition does a few small things to make it just that much better. There are new areas, new abilities, a bit more story, and new difficulty modes. We'll discuss those in their respective sections. Arguably, the biggest change between the original and the Definitive Edition is convenience. The developers implemented two quality-of-life features that really should have been in the original game. One of these changes seems like such an obvious inclusion that it makes me wonder if the original was actually incomplete, even though it was excellent, and that the Definitive Edition was intended to be the original release. This, of course, is a theory and has not been confirmed in any way. So what are these quality-of-life changes? Despite the fact that there are only two, they make up a big difference. First, we have the ability to warp between what are called spirit wells. While navigating the forest is extremely fun and fairly fast no matter where you are, the ability to warp comes in quite handy near the end of the game when you are searching for those last few upgrades to 100% the save file. Second, we have backtracking support. In the original game, once you cleared the three major dungeons, if that is what you would call them, you couldn't go back in. If you missed an upgrade, you were out of luck. You absolutely could not re-enter the dungeons to get at them. As a moderate completionist, this drove me nuts once I realized that I missed one tiny collectible and would have a final save file of 99%. Which brings me to the fact that once you completed the final dungeon, you could not reload the file in the original game. It was locked. You were done. I actually did not know that when I initially finished the game. I figured I would be able to go back in if I wanted to. After such a great experience, that really frustrated me. The Definitive Edition does away with that restriction. Not only can you reload the save file to just before the final challenge, you can also re-enter any of the previous dungeons. I was extremely happy when I learned this would be included in the Definitive Edition features. This is actually the key change that makes me wonder if the Definitive Edition was intended to be the release build. The ability to go back into a save file, at the very least to simply enjoy traversing the forest, seems like a no-brainer. Why this function was not included in the original baffles me. I wouldn't say the warp feature felt nearly as absent from the original as backtracking support, but it is something that is common in many exploration-based games. It should be noted that the Definitive Edition isn't DLC. It's an entirely separate game that you need to purchase. Given that Ori and the Blind Forest is a Metroidvania-style game with a 2D open world in which all the content takes place, this does make logical sense. The developers were not just adding content, they were altering the world. A developer explains this in a Steam forum post, link in the description. Whether or not the new quality of life features were intended for the original release, the rest of the Definitive Edition features all seem like new ideas, and they greatly added to the overall experience. Again, we'll address each new feature in their respective sections. For those who don't know, Metroidvania is a specific gameplay concept that has a number of common characteristics. The name is derived from the Metroid and Castlevania series, both of which have very similar concepts that were fairly innovative for their time. The Metroidvania specific characteristics are as follows. A large open world. There are no levels in Metroidvania style games. The entire map is interconnected. Discoverable and unlockable abilities. It's important to understand that in Metroidvania-style games, abilities are not just used for combat, but for accessing previously inaccessible areas and secrets. 2D and side-scrolling. Traditionally, Metroidvania-style games are 2D side-scrollers. This is what sets them apart from typical action-adventure games with unlockable abilities or tools, such as The Legend of Zelda. Ori and the Blind Forest is Metroidvania through and through. It has a gorgeous 2D open world with many abilities to discover and unlock. You discover abilities by encountering ancestral trees, which bestow power unto Ori. You unlock abilities through the game's leveling system. Throughout the game, you collect spirit orbs that give Ori experience points. Spirit orbs can be collected by killing enemies and finding spirit containers. There is a talent tree that is slowly unlocked as you progress through the game. As more abilities are unlocked, and as Ori levels up more and more, the forest becomes easier, faster, and more fun to traverse. By the end of the game, you really begin to feel like a master of the forest. There is even an achievement called Master of the Forest, which unlocks when you complete the tree. But don't worry, the developers have tuned the experience curve well enough that grinding is not required to unlock all abilities by the end of the game. In fact, at the end of my normal difficulty playthrough, I had more than 6 levels worth of excess experience. At this point, I'm going to start discussing the different abilities you unlock throughout the game. If you don't enjoy gameplay spoilers and have not played Ori and the Blind Forest, but may want to, I do not recommend you watch this segment. You can either skip ahead to other sections, timestamps in the description, or simply turn off the video. There are 11 total abilities in Ori and the Blind Forest Definitive Edition, 2 of which were not in the original game. Spirit Flame. Sign, Ori's companion, shoots homing missiles at enemies, hazards, and obstacles. Wall jump. Ori repeatedly jumps on a wall to either scale the wall or leap to the other side, very similar to Mega Man. Charge Flame. Sign charges the homing missiles to cause a large explosion to clear major obstacles. Double jump. Ori performs an additional jump in midair. This can be upgraded to a triple jump. Bash. This ability is a little bit odd. Ori links to an enemy or object and launches it in any given direction, while being launched in the opposite direction. This is most often used as a means to quickly and effectively traverse the forest, but can also be used as a highly effective combat ability. It is called Bash because Ori can, and often does, bash enemies or objects into walls to unlock different areas. However, I believe a more accurate name for this ability would be Launch, but that is beside the point. Stomp. Ori quickly slams into the ground, causing damage to nearby enemies and breaking the environment where able. Kuro's Feather. Ori uses a feather to glide and ride wind streams. Climb. Ori quickly climbs walls. This is similar to the wall jump ability, but is far more efficient and effective. However, I frequently struggle to use this ability due to an uncomfortable input on mouse and keyboard. Charge Jump. Ori gathers energy before jumping. This allows for Ori to destroy breakable walls and damage enemies. A charge jump can be used while holding onto a wall and can also home in on enemies. Light Burst. Ori throws a small orb of light that can damage enemies and light torches. This ability is unique to the Definitive Edition. Dash. Ori quickly dashes across the ground. This does not damage enemies and does not make Ori immune to damage. It can be upgraded to allow for an air dash. This ability is unique to the Definitive Edition. Almost every time you obtain a new ability, the world opens up quite a bit. Each skill improves Ori's ability to destroy an obstacle, clear a gap, or solve a puzzle. There is a significant inequity regarding how often each ability is necessary, however. I'm going to break down the abilities into 3 tiers that measure their necessity in the open world. Tier 1 abilities are used everywhere and are necessary throughout the game. Most of these are unlocked within the first hour of gameplay. Spirit Flame will likely be your most used ability, as it is the first ability unlocked and is the most basic form of combat. This is to be expected. Double and triple jump are also used almost everywhere. Wall jump and eventually climb are extremely important. Finally, we have Bash. The ability is not unlocked until about a third of the way into the game, but it opens up the world more than any other ability by far. In many areas, it essentially gives Ori the ability to fly. Tier 2 abilities are at least useful in most places and are necessary for most of the game, or at least until another more useful ability is unlocked. Stomp is likely the most commonly used of the Tier 2 abilities. It unlocks many areas and secrets, but is really only necessary in a few areas. Kuro's Feather is extremely useful and important for a little bit after you unlock it, but quickly loses its necessity. It never becomes useless, however, and almost always speeds certain areas up. Finally, Charge Jump is unlocked near the end of the game, but is quite useful. It is an absolutely necessary ability in the late game, and allows Ori to discover many secrets in previous areas. Tier 3 abilities are somewhat useful, but are mostly pointless outside of one specific area or after a certain amount of secrets are unlocked. Charge Flame is the biggest example. It is useful in the first hour or so of gameplay for unlocking a few areas. After that, it is only used to break crystal formations that contain spirit orbs. There are not very many of these in the world. Charge Flame is pretty much useless in combat, as the time it takes to charge does not do enough damage compared to regular homing missiles, especially after just a few traits are unlocked on the combat tree. Unfortunately, the other 2 abilities that I would consider Tier 3 are the Definitive Edition specific skills. Light Burst, while initially very cool, is not very useful in combat and is only used to complete a few puzzles throughout the world. By the end of the game, I wasn't even using it, despite how cool it is. Dash is a particularly weird example. I absolutely love the dash ability, and used it throughout the entire game after I obtained it. Air Dash was even more fun to use. It really feels epic to speed through the forest. However, dash is only necessary in one area. After that, it is simply a convenience ability. It comes in handy for sure, but it is absolutely not necessary. So, you use these abilities to navigate the forest, defeat enemies, unlock secrets, and solve puzzles. The game does a good job of teaching you how to use each ability when they're initially unlocked, but after that, it is up to you to figure out how they can help you in the different areas. Next, I want to discuss the set pieces. Ori and the Blind Forest does not have bosses. There are a few minor mini-bosses, but no major bosses. Instead, at the end of each dungeon, there is a set piece. These take the form of rapidly changing environments that must be quickly navigated and are usually quite epic. Most of my deaths took place at these points in the game. My favorite moment in the entire game is the first set piece you encounter, as Ori must rapidly ascend the Ginzo tree to escape the rising waters. Just watch this listen to the music, and enjoy. Set pieces put everything you have learned up to that point to the test, and the test can be quite hard. You either need to have lightning-fast reflexes, or you need to slowly memorize how each set piece progresses as you attempt it over and over. Which brings me to the final gameplay topic I want to discuss. Death. You die a lot in Ori and the Blind Forest, and I mean a lot. I likely have hundreds of deaths in my normal mode playthrough, and even more in my previous playthrough of the original. Death can be annoying, but only if it's not managed well by the player. Checkpoints are immensely rare. Instead, there is a system called Spirit Link, which allows you to save your progress and create a respawn point almost anywhere. It also allows you to access Ori's talent tree and finalize upgrades. It is on a roughly 5 to 10 second cooldown and is extremely important to reuse regularly. It is easy to forget about this system, which can lead to dying and being respawned far earlier. Respawn times are very fast, usually not more than a split second. The developers knew most players will die a lot, and have gone lengths to make it as painless as possible, while still maintaining a solid difficulty that rewards player skill. Some might think the ability to create save and respawn points from anywhere makes the game too easy. I wholeheartedly disagree with that sentiment. In many cases, this game requires you to memorize how to get through an area, with many insta-death traps scattered throughout. For those who want a truly grueling challenge, the developers have included a one-life mode with the definitive edition. This is absolutely not intended for new players, as I believe it would be nearly impossible to complete this game on a first playthrough without any previous knowledge. The set pieces being a major reason I feel this way. They alone require certain degrees of memorization. With that said, I do feel that one life mode is entirely possible, albeit difficult to beat. While the base game can be quite difficult and unforgiving, there is very little RNG used in the game, if none at all. It's a grand challenge for those who have truly mastered the forest. Ori and the Blind Forest is perhaps most famous for its art. All environments, characters, enemies, and objects are beautifully hand-painted. In many games, interactable objects are distinguished from the background by design. They either glow or seem out of place. In Ori, interactable objects blend well into the backgrounds. Instead of being shown by the game what can and can't be interacted with, you need to infer based on the designs of the environments or by experimentation. This could be seen as quite annoying, but most methods of advancement are fairly intuitive by their own design. Despite taking place in a forest, the environments vary quite a bit. Between exploring dark caverns, climbing a giant tree, navigating a burning mountain, and all the other areas, Ori and the Blind Forest never becomes stale in its environments. The particle effects can be very fun and flashy, at points taking up a large amount of the screen. Rarely is there a case of not being able to tell what is happening on the screen. But there were many occasions when I got hit by a projectile I couldn't see coming due to the particle effects. This problem gets worse the more enemies on screen there are, for obvious reasons. The music is, of course, fantastic. Ori and the Blind Forest has one of the best soundtracks of any recent games. It has become iconic in the video game industry. The soundtrack's composer, Gareth Coker, even live performed the trailer music for Wisps at the Microsoft 2017 E3 conference. I've listened to the entire soundtrack many times over. The music works well with the art to create a mystical aesthetic unlike almost any other game I've played. However, I have an issue with how the music is implemented into the definitive edition. In the original game, tracks flowed into each other naturally. Dramatic moments were accompanied by dramatic score that would conclude together at impactful moments. The music's implementation into the game was masterful. Unfortunately, something went wrong with the definitive edition. Tracks don't match up as well as they did in the original. For the most part, it's barely noticeable, but at the most important moments in the game, the issue is blaringly obvious. Here's the first example I encountered. Why did the music just stop? Why didn't the scene sync up with the track like in the original? Was I the only one to experience this issue? Unlikely. If this was the only point at which this would happen, I wouldn't have such a problem with it. It could have been a fluke. But no, it continually happens throughout the game. The music is one of my favorite aspects of Ori, and the definitive edition's implementation of it disappoints me. Ori and the Blind Forest has a very simple story. Anyone familiar with Final Fantasy will catch on to the premise quite quickly. A cataclysmic event has occurred in the forest, and Ori must restore the elements of water, wind, and fire in order to cure the environments of their blights. The spirit tree, Nibel, narrates Ori's journey throughout the game. While the story is quite simple, the characters are very compelling. There is no dialogue in Ori and the Blind Forest, only non-verbal communication between characters. The following is a short description of each character. Ori. The main character of the game, Ori is a small forest spirit who holds the power to restore the forest to its former glory. It is a very brave and compassionate creature, but also functions very much like a child in the beginning of the game. You may have noticed that I have referred to Ori either by its name or it. The developers have stated that Ori is genderless. Naru. Ori's surrogate mother. Naru is a humanoid creature who took Ori under her care before the cataclysm. Sign. Ori's companion throughout the journey. Sign is a magical light that originates within the spirit tree. It seems to know the history and mysteries of the forest. Nibel, the spirit tree. Guardian of the forest. The spirit tree narrates Ori's journey and explains the backstory of the cataclysm as the game goes on. Gumo. A curious, somewhat humanoid creature. Gumo is the last survivor of a lost and advanced civilization. Naru's father. In the definitive edition, there is an additional character in the story, Naru's father. He is introduced and characterized through visions discovered throughout one of the definitive edition specific areas. Kuro. A massive owl who is hostile to Nibel's light. She is determined to hunt Ori. At this point, I want to discuss different aspects of the story and characters. This does mean that spoilers are ahead. If you do not want spoilers, I would turn off the video. You won't be able to avoid them from this point forward. The developers use nonverbal communication in a masterful way to not only allow these characters to communicate without dialogue, but to effectively characterize and develop each throughout the game. For example, watch how Naru and her father interact with the other spirits. The nonverbals help show their relationship and how the father feels about the spirits. He seems to fear them and wants to protect Naru from them. That is love from a parent to a child. We'll talk more on that in just a little while. By the end of the game, I felt very attached to all of these characters. I also realized how their different motivations were not only understandable, but relatable. Ori and the Blind Forest has three key themes: nature, balance, and love. These themes are interlinked in the events and character interactions. The cycle of nature is a pervading concept throughout Ori and the Blind Forest. Life and death is natural and is part of every creature's existence. This is true for the forest as well. Everything in the forest lives, but must also die. However, the cycle does not end with death. Life and death continually shift, just as it does with the forest. The cataclysm in the beginning of the game is part of the cycle. Nibel releases massive amounts of energy in what seems to be a normal environmental event in the forest. The same energy is what restores the forest at the end of the game. Naru dies to famine, Ori is brought to the brink of death, and both are restored through the light of the forest. Unfortunately, nature is not kind to all creatures. The same light that gives so much life to the forest was too much for the denizens of the night. Kuro's babies were killed in the Great Storm. With only one egg left, Kuro became enraged and ruthlessly determined to save her final offspring. She ripped Sign from Nibel and interrupted the process. This left the forest desolate and dying. Balance involves give and take. Light cannot exist without the dark, and dark cannot exist without the light. They are direct opposites, but must coexist for the good of the forest. When one attempts to overtake the other, as Kuro attempted to snuff out the light that endangered her offspring, life begins to wither and die. Which leads us to love. Kuro is not evil. She simply wanted to protect her final child. Naru loves Ori like a mother loves a child, and vice versa. When that is communicated to Kuro through Naru's bravery and unwavering dedication to protect Ori, she realizes that they are not enemies. Kuro also realizes that, in order for her child to live on, balance needs to be restored. Kuro sacrifices herself to ensure that the forest is reborn, and that her child can live. Naru sacrifices her final reserves of food for Ori, simply out of love. Gumo sacrifices that last remaining symbol of his brethren in order to restore Naru's life and make Ori happy. In the end, Naru, Gumo, and Ori live happily together. They love each other as a family. They also nurture Kuro's last egg, which will become part of their family when it is hatched. Perhaps we will have already met this owl in the trailer for Ori and the Will of the Wisps. Nature, balance, love, all intertwined and all equally important to the story of Ori and the Blind Forest. It is no exaggeration to say that Ori is an emotional experience. It had me thinking about how much I love and appreciate my family. It had me thinking about how I deal with loss and how I will experience loss in the future. It is inevitable, so I need to appreciate my time with my loved ones as much as possible. It also had me thinking about how I will someday be a father, and how I will protect my future children and raise them to have happy lives. All of this from a short game about a little carbuncle. Thank you for taking the time to watch this. I know this is another long video, and I really appreciate you sticking through to the end. I hope it was interesting and/or informative. I will see you next time.